remember to buy a copy of your favorite books from the cheeky merchants. If we don't have it, we'll source it for you, but we'll definitely find the book for you.
Good evening, cheeky natives. As you may have realized, Shubnum and I have been recording at all different times and at all different places. And so this evening, I'm really excited for our conversation. I'm super, super excited to just delve deeper into some of the questions around this book that I have for this author. Shubnum, how are
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing?
you? Sound very well.
I am. It's always exciting to speak about books, but I was just thinking now, you and I love things. We would be up at this time talking about books.
If this was a meeting, I would have said no. Like I would have told my colleagues, absolutely not. But for books, it just makes sense, right? Find the thing you love, that's the thing. So I'm super excited. I'm going to introduce our guest for this evening without too much time wasting. So our guest this evening is Shubnum Khan, who is an author and artist based in Durban. Her acclaimed debut novel, Onion Tears, was shortlisted for the Penguin Prize for African Writing and the University of Johannesburg Debut Fiction Prize. Her quirky essay collection, How I Accidentally Became a Global Stock Photo, was published in South Africa and India in 2021. And today we're going to be discussing the lost love of Akbar Manzil. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
I was interested in this question about, obviously your book has been published in 3 places, or actually more, but the US, India, and South Africa. And in kind of the international space, if we can call it that, so the US, the UK, as well as India, it's got a different title to the title that it has in South Africa. And I was interested in kind of that decision. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that a lot. So in the US and the UK, it's called The Gin Waits 100 Years. And in South Africa, it's called The Lost Love of Akbar Manzil. The US published it first, and the original title of the novel was called Paper Flowers. And they decided that wasn't a catchy enough title. They said, give us a list of titles at the last minute. Like this was a few months before it could be published. And we gave a list, and I did not think they would choose The Gin Waits 100 Years. But they chose it, I think, because it's very evocative and like exotic and interesting, and we feature the gin. But when in South Africa, when I did the deal with Pan Macmillan, the publisher and I had a discussion, and basically it was a marketing thing. We decided that South Africans are really superstitious. So when you have the word tokolosh or gin or something in the title, like a really strong supernatural word in the title, it might deter readers away from the book. So we decided to go with the other option on my list of names, which was The Lost Love of Akbar Manzil, which I had always liked, which I thought suited the book more, to be honest. And so that was the one we went. So it was purely a marketing thing.
There's been you published Onion Tears in 2011, and this book has now been published over a decade later. And that's interesting, right? To have had such a big gap between the first and the second book. Almost feels like a Sade album. And so the question is really around like why there was such a big gap in between your first novel and this novel, but also what was different about writing this novel, having written your first novel that had so much critical acclaim. Was there a certain pressure to avoid the sophomore curse that we've seen some writers experience?
So I didn't expect there to be such a big gap between the two. I thought, oh, people seem to just pop out novels after every 3 years. I'll do it, I'll get it done. And it didn't work out that way. It was not easy. And I really was upset by other authors who were doing it. I was going through a lot in those years. I really feel like a different person than I was 10 years ago. I feel like I was struggling a lot. And so my novel was struggling a lot. I was going through depression and my own issues. The characters didn't know what to do. So I was fiddling with that novel for a long time, but it wasn't coming to fruition. It wasn't coming to fully its form. And I think when I started feeling better about myself, and when I started getting my confidence back, and that took a long time, that took a good few years, then the story started growing, and I started applying myself more to that novel. And so I think that's why it took so many years. I had to figure out my own self before I could figure out the novel. In terms of it being my second novel and the kind of novel that I was writing compared to the first one, I don't know if there was pressure on me at that stage because so many years had passed. for me, it was more about just finish it. Just finish it. I wasn't even thinking about like, how does this compare to Onion Tears? For me, the aim was just finish it, because if you don't do it now, are you even a writer? Can you even write? You need to just get this book out there. Like, it's taking too long, and it was becoming a weight around my shoulders. So I don't think I was thinking too hard about it critically, like what was it going to be received at? It was more like just finish it and get it done, get it out there, try to get it out there, because it's taking you so damn long. That's what I think it was. And I think when it's your second novel, you do get over your hang-ups from the first one. I think this novel, I was trying to make sure there was nobody in this novel that could say it was based on them, because that was like my first novel. People were like, oh, in the family, this, that. So this novel, I was like, nobody will ever be able to recognize themselves in any of these characters. They're going to be so outlandish. They're going to be so crazy. They're going to be so strange that cannot recognize yourself even if you are in there. So that was the only thing I think I had in my head.
This book particularly moves through a number of genres. Like, on the one hand, is a coming of age novel. On the other, it's a historic novel. And then there's also like a romance, which I enjoyed, but there's also a thriller. And we were interested in kind of thinking about moving through all these genres. Was it difficult, or was it, as you've said, you wanted to stretch yourself in the second novel, and one of the ways in which to do it was to dip your toes in a number of genres and hope that it worked out?
Yeah, I get that a lot, because people who read it under horror are like, this is not horror, and then they're disappointed. And people who read it under fantasy was like, this is not fantasy. This is not really romance. It's a little bit of everything. And I think that's why I think Gothic did well, because Gothic encapsulates so many different things, the kind of creepiness and the dread, and then the romance and the haunted house. And so I think Gothic is a good genre where it's encapsulated, but I didn't go into it thinking I'm going to do a bit of this and a bit of that. I just went into it thinking I want to write. I really like romance. I want to put romance in here somewhere. Oh, we have this big empty house. Maybe we should fill it up with some ghosts. Like, it just went along the way. These kind of things just came into the novel that made it a bit of everything. And I like it that way. But I do think in terms of identifying it in the book world, it makes it hard for the novel, because I've seen people really disappointed who come in thinking it's something, and then they're like, it was not what I expected at all. So I think it's hard, but I didn't go into it with any intention of trying to put it into any genre. I was just like, I'm going to write what I like, whatever that is. I write what I like.
In this book, sorry, the house is a living character, right? So the house has a memory, it has thoughts of its own, it has experiences, and it's interesting to think of something as impermanent, but also as permanent as the house being that way, right? And then also being an individual character that connects the two stories. And so I'm interested in the house as a character in the book, right? Not only to explore the idea of these places having memory, right? Like, to think about the fact that places have memory, they hold memory, whether it's institutional memory, it's personal memories, they hold history, but also that they can be a connector for generations. The house for me is very interesting. I was hoping we could speak a little bit about the house as a character in the book and as a connection between the two sort of main stories that run throughout this book.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, as just in terms of like a plot device. Also, the jinn and the house act as a gateway or bridge between the past and the present, because they're remembering. And I think I've just always been interested in writing inanimate. I'm always wondering, I can't talk in front of my car. I'll be like, oh, I need a new car, but I don't want to say it in front of the car. Or if I need a new laptop, I'm not going to say it. I'm always conscious of inanimate things having feelings. I don't know why. And that transferred. And I think that's throughout the novel. I talk about buttons underneath the sofas that are waiting and wondering, when is someone going to find them? I'm always interested in the forgotten things that are forgotten, what happens to them. And that comes from me also always being obsessed about love and wondering what happens when love goes. And so what happens when love disappears? Because it's such a strong emotion. And how do two people who've loved one another, then just one day someone says, I don't love you anymore? So I think that transfers in an indirect way to the house, because it's forgotten. And I'm always interested in knowing about the forgotten. And so what is even the house thinking, because it's now this huge thing that it represents love in a way, because it had so much of ambition and hope put into it. And yet, at the end of the day, when time has passed, it's now abandoned and forgotten. And I want to explore that. So I think that idea just extends itself to the house. Like, why? What is that thing thinking when it's forgotten? I want to talk about the things that are forgotten and what does memory mean in that? And that just transfers to the huge house.
I love that. I wanted to talk about geographic location. The book is set in Durban for the most part, right, in surroundings, but it also is set in Durban in the past and the present, right? And I think it's really quite significant. And I wanted to speak, is Durban also a placeholder or a device geographically to drive the story? Because the house does, essentially, when we think about the house, we think about this beautiful house, right? And then as time goes by, it's abandoned and it becomes this hostel in a way, right, with all these myriad of people who live in it. But I wanted to think about Durban as a geographical location and thinking about histories and why it was important for you to set the novel in a place like Durban and surrounding areas.
Yeah. Yes, there was intention behind that. And it links up to this whole thing about the forgotten. I think for some reason I have ended up in Durban my whole life. And I always think people with ambition leave Durban. And somehow I've stayed here my whole life. And I think my purpose is now to write about it and to explain actually that it's this really interesting city that often gets forgotten in the shadow of Johannesburg and Cape Town. It's not written enough about, and it has a lot to offer, but I just don't think people stay enough to see it. That's not meant to say, like, I'm so noble, I've stayed here. I've just got stuck here somehow. So I think using Durban was part of that whole thing of trying to explore the underrated or the forgotten or the understated. And I think when you live long enough in the city, also, you come to know it in intimate ways, like the kind of heat and the kind of cold and the kind of people you meet here, whether you want to or you don't want to. And as a writer, that interests me. Every day I'm meeting and I'm seeing the weather and I'm meeting people and I'm learning about this place. And I wanted to talk about it and I wanted to write about it and I wanted to put it, again, it's about reviving. I'm saying forgotten, but I'm sure there's a better word for this, but it's about reviving that thing that doesn't get enough attention, I think, and that should. And I think that's also was my intention to write about Durban. I was like, I'm here, I can do it. I know this place. I have a feel of this place. I want to put it as a major location in this novel and give you the sense of the space. Yeah.
I love that the women in this book, in many ways, are at the forefront, right? Particularly, I've been thinking a lot about how we exclude children from being able to hold public memory, to hold archival memory, and almost the ways in which children remember things is dismissed, right? It's just being like, oh, this is how a child would remember, oh, this is not really what happened, right? But the protagonist of this novel is a 12-year-old girl who Sana has experienced so much tragedy, right? She loses her mother, she has to relocate, and prior to even losing her mother is not her mom's not well, right? So even her mother's presence is contested in many ways. But Sana is the protagonist of the story, and she tells the story, and this is a really important story because she brings to life, even Mina's story comes to the forefront because of Sana. And there's just a commentary that I feel that you've made around the importance of memory that children hold, but also the ability of children to be archival holders, but also history holders. And I wanted us to expand a little bit about why you chose Sana to be the one who tells the story as opposed to anybody else.
I wanted to say, just connected to that, I also think that we often think of children, as Alma said, as people who make up stuff, right? And so children are not to be trusted. But I also got the sense that in holders of memory, there was also the purity and the innocence. So like the idea that like this child was entering into this house, right, with no preconceived notion, and her curiosity was able to propel the story forward. So we know about Mina because she was curious to find out what are the stories that this house holds. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I love when we have these discussions because then it makes me think more deeply sometimes about what I'm writing. Look, I think it was important to have Sana as the main character and as the opening to the book and carrying the story forward because she's in that space between childhood and adulthood, like she's 15. And I think that's a really important space for anyone because you are now choosing who you are becoming in the world. I think even in terms of carrying the memory of the story, I love this thing that you're saying about her being, maybe children are unreliable with their memory. And so even when we meet the dead sister, we're like, oh, we don't know if this is part of her imagination or guilt or something. But it is confirmed, like later on in the novel, that she is real because she meets the jinn. And if she was not a real character, she wouldn't be able to talk to this jinn. That interaction wouldn't have even happened. So it confirms that she's really a reliable character. And yeah, I think it was just important for me, especially to write about. I think I opened one of the first few pages is talking about how when you're on the cusp of womanhood, there's like a light and a light at the eaves, and you don't know what's waiting, and it feels like a box in your chest and it's rattling, and you're not sure what the future holds. And that was always important for me to write, like about that space and what does it mean and how does it shape you into the adult that you become. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that is why I chose Sana. I was just so interested in that. Also, again, it comes back to the forgotten. I think that forgotten space that we forget about of how crucial it is to be a 14, 15, 16-year-old in the world. Also, yes, sorry, to bring to your point, is that she's the one to open up the house, the history of the house, exactly what you said, is that she has something which I hope we never lose, and I hope reading keeps that within us. But she's got that curiosity and that thing that you lose when you get older. I think there's a line in the book that says she has something that the others don't. She has an extra bit of soul, and she has youth, and she has all these things that are stopping the others from finding out a story. And really, I think that's that curiosity that children have, which, and I always tell myself, so always keep your wonder, always keep your wonder. And I think reading does. So I'm glad we're a bunch of readers here because I'm always telling myself, keep your wonder, keep your sense of wonder. And that is the thing that opens up the whole book for the reader, that opens up Sana's whole life. And that I think for anyone in life, your curiosity will keep you going, but you can't lose it.
It's also interesting because I think it's linked to kind of something that Alma said earlier. I was also interested in this curiosity as a way to think about archival practices, right? So for me, I feel like what Sana allows us to begin to think about is because of her curiosity, she's now looking around, she's finding diaries, she's finding photographs, and in many ways, it's like archival practices, right? And it leads her to question and make notes. And essentially, it opens up the house to tell the story of the house, right? But also to tell the story of Mina, which I feel otherwise we would not have known but for Sana's curiosity. And yes, while the stories do run quite parallel, we get into the story through Sana in many ways, right? So the past kind of becomes to our forefront because of Sana. And I wanted to know if the commentary really was about the importance of archival practice to begin to think about houses as holders of memories, right? And when we look close enough, any nook and any cranny can tell us a story about a particular house and the history of the house.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's what it is. You've said it. I'm always thinking about the remnants that anything leaves behind. And there's always clues. If you look close enough, there's always clues, and nothing can stay hidden. I always believe that. And I think the house is like an archive of history and of memory. I really believe that. I think I was trying to put that in the novel. Like there's fingerprints on the window in the attic that no one notices. There's blood that you might not see in bright light on the floor. And so definitely, I think there is, what you're saying is correct. And there's a history in every little thing. And the Sana, the child, has to bring that out to us, to show us that in everything, there's something, and nothing is lost forever. Nothing is lost forever.
We're taking a short break. We're taking a short break.
Grief in this book, speak about nothing being lost forever. Grief in this book is particularly interesting because I think we often think of grief as this thing that in many ways is like individual, but it's personal. So you feel a particular grief, and there almost isn't this connection. But in the book, grief is the connector, right? So the grief that the jinn feels, that Sana feels, that is the connection between them, right? That is the ways in which many of the characters in this book are linked. You know, I think of, even in the book, I think of the characters who live in the house are also all experiencing different kinds of grief. Somebody's son has up and left and immigrated to Europe or to the UK or Canada, I think it's Canada. And someone else in the book is experiencing a very particular kind of heartbreak that they are grieving as well, right? So there's so much grief in this book, but it's also how the characters are connected. And I'm curious about the concept of what seems to be a very personal experience as a connector for so many of the characters in this book. You're muted, Shubnum.
I think it's a really sad novel. Everybody's going through some kind of grief. But I do believe that in life, everybody has some grief that they carry. Life is about going on despite that grief and finding ways to go on. I see it as a hopeful book because these are characters who have gone through stuff. Sana has gone through a lot of bad things. So has her father and almost each character in the novel. And yet they go on despite. And I didn't go out with the intention of writing this book with all these sad characters, but I do think essentially if you're going to write a character as human, you got to deal with their griefs that they're going through. And yeah, and that's the way I would answer the question.
I'm particularly interested in the relationship between the jinn and Sana, right? Because these are two sort of life forms that exist in different planes that also have different experiences, but have lost somebody very dear to them. And yeah, we could say that everybody in life is experiencing a loss, but these two have a very particular kind of loss that I find to be striking for this book, right? The other people in the book have a kind of loss that you can explain in some way, right? Your son has up and left, you've had a heartbreak. Those are griefs that you can, in many ways, just rationalize. They are logical. Sana has lost a parent as a child, right? And there's a thing about being a motherless child, which is very particular. The jinn has lost Mina, and there's something very particular about that kind of relationship and that loss.
I think I go a lot into the grief of those particular characters, and the grief of those characters is very visual. Sana's grief is an actual person who is manifested from her grief. It can be it's a real character, but it's manifested, I believe, like from her grief, her guilt, and she's almost like a character it's almost like I've given a character to that voice we hear in ourselves when that says you're not good enough, you can't do this, you're going to fail, you know. And so her grief is like an actual physical form following her around. And for the jinn, again, it's a very visual form of its grief, like it actually physically changes into the person that it is grieving over. And it still carries the mangled leg of the woman that it loved, and it moves around the house grieving. It cannot think beyond its grief. So I do think I'm exploring grief in the different ways that it can happen, which is in the jinn's case, in an overwhelming sense. That is when I feel like grief just overtakes your life and you cannot see beyond your own grief. I think there's a line in the novel that says that the jinn doesn't bother with anything that doesn't deal with its own grief. And that is the jinn's purpose, just to show you that grief can overwhelm you and overtake your life. And there is no escaping it. Sana, in that sense, is to show you, or at least in what I feel, is to also give the sense that it's a war that you're fighting all the time and that you're trying to overcome it. But you can't, sometimes the grief is just overwhelming and you can't fight and you want to give up. And then other times it's like you can see a light and you're trying to reach for that light and you're trying to get up and go. So I do think, yeah, those two characters particularly show you what grief can do with your life and how it can affect you and the different forms that it comes up in, because it comes up in so many different ways.
Similar to grief, love plays a very central role in this novel. Right? It kind of feels for me that love is also a character on its own. And it's interesting to think about you as a lover, and having written about your essay about modern love, and just thinking about the ways in which love is something that you think a lot about. And I was thinking about one of the things you write in the book. You write, one of the characters says, "You're just a stupid romantic. You think love can fix everything. If I had been given my life on this earth, I would have made sure to break every heart I could, while you'll probably fall in love with the first person who pays you any attention and stay with them even if they treat you badly. Bah, what a waste. I would never be as pitiful as you." And for me, I was thinking about the ways in which love shows up in the book, right? So we think about romantic love, and we think about familial love, and we also think about love that isn't finalized, love that started but didn't come to fruition, about love as a character, but also love as a driver of human connection, and not in the way that we understand it as like a romance, because I think that you do really deep work in thinking about the various ways in which love shows up. And I wanted to speak about what are some of your reflections, having written the novel, about the ways in which the various forms of love show up in the book, but also thinking through your life. And I saw an Instagram kind of video where you're saying you've done all these things and people are just concerned about like why you are unmarried and childless.
You want to know
right?
when I'm getting married?
So it's interesting to think about the ways in which we think about love, right? Like that you are not accomplished in a society if you do not have certain things, a child and a married person, no matter what it is you think about in the world, but also to think about like your own kind of reflections around love in that context.
Before you respond, is to also note that the love in this book is complicated, right? I think that Shubnum makes very deliberate decisions around writing a love that is easy to conceptualize, right? Because even the great love story in this book is a conflicting one. It's one that begins with somebody who has class privilege, who has financial privilege, who has the advantage of age, exercising those powers over somebody who is in a different social class than them, who's in a different financial class than them, who may not be able to say no in the ways that we conceptualize, right? So even the great love story in this book is complicated. So there's a commentary that I feel like Shubnum is making around what great love looks like, but also around questioning what the reader themselves would be thinking of love, right? And that for me was striking in reading the book.
Yeah, that's all true. I loved that space in this book to explore love because I don't know it and I want to know it. And so I loved that I had this character to play around and ask these questions. And that's also why there's such an array of characters in this novel. It's jam-packed with characters because I want to explore love in all its different ways between siblings and between parents and between friends and between ghosts and between lovers. You can only explore love if you have so many different ways of exploring it. And so the book has a lot of characters, I know, but that's the only way I could explore or try to explore love in its different ways. And what was I saying? Just jog me. What were you saying, Little Kurolo, about because I was something you were saying that I wanted to answer.
It's interesting.
Oh, my own life, right?
Well, I suppose you spoke about this a little bit when you spoke about because I don't know it. And I'm interested in that. What are kind of the musings of writing so intimately and so deeply about like love, right? And the reflections in your own life, because oftentimes it feels like we live in a society that prioritizes physical manifestations of love as opposed to achievement or whatever it may be.
Yes, and I remember the point I was going to make is that we're told love is a certain way. And I thought love was a certain way, right? But even if you've read my modern love essay, love doesn't turn out the way you expect it to. And love is so complicated and there are so many facets to it. And one day you love someone and one day you hate them and the next day you love them. And you can love a few people. I was only told you could love one person and you're going to find your soulmate. And it's not, it's so damn complicated and it's hard. And I think this novel, I wanted to make that clear, was like, it's not simple. And there's an article I wrote for Stylist magazine, and they have a little Instagram post that says, I'm 38 and I've never been in a relationship, which is me. And the comments below it just make me laugh because there's people who are like, you're going to end up alone in life. And I'm like, do you know we could end up alone in life even if we have someone? You can feel alone even if you're in a relationship. Why do we not talk about these basic things that to me now they seem basic, but at that time I didn't understand when I was growing up? Was like, you can be alone in a relationship, you can have a whole family, but by the end of your life, you might not have your whole family with you. Why is it a guarantee? That you need to learn how to be on your own also within your own self, or you won't be able to bear this life as time goes on. So these were important things for me to discuss and important things for me to express, because we're not told these things. We're only told this romantic idea, Disney version of what love is. And you need that knowledge to live this life. You need it to be able to bear the weight of things to come. And they're not preparing us properly about love. And I became very determined to try to express that there are many ways and that it is hard. And it's not always easy. It's not a simple thing if you meet your soulmate and you're married and you have kids and everything is perfect. No way. And I especially wanted like girls in my community even to know that, because we're not taught those things. And so, yeah, it's messy. And I think I just wanted to use all those characters to express those versions of different kinds of love.
I'm curious about what feels like an ode to the interior lives of Indian women, right? So there's a very particular way in which you chose to write about the interior lives of Indian women. And I wanted us to just speak a little bit about why you chose to make that deliberate decision in this book.
You mean with all the characters, the past and the present?
The past and the present, right?
Yeah. I think also, again, just to say it's complicated and it's not simple. And especially, I think, so some of the characters, it depends on which character you're talking about, but some of the characters express that more. So I think like Razia Bibi, who is very traditional and who is like, a girl has to get married, a girl has to get married and she has to make like round rotis. And if you don't get married, you're going to suffer in life. Just take what you can get, which is an Indian auntie I've probably met many times in my life who tells me this. I also think this applies to many other cultures, that pressure for a girl to fall in traditional domestic roles is everywhere. But I mean, I particularly talk about it in my own culture because I know it and I've seen it, and I can give you specificities of how it's told to young girls. But also, she's a complicated character. I think I've got characters like this in Onion Tears also, because you also see her life was like really hard. And she's also carrying the generational trauma from that she had when she was older, and that she was probably told when she's got to adjust to the next generation. You think it's going to be like this, but actually it's going to be like that. Anyways, she was taught these things and she carries it down. And also, but also we love her in her own way, even though she's this complicated character, which is what I think you're supposed to do with writing. You're supposed to show the nuance of people. You're supposed to show how complicated they are, and that they can be, that they can have their faults, but that there's also reasons why they are the way they are. She had a terrible husband. She had to fight to be who she was. And so that's always important to me, to try to show the different ways. So there's no good or bad character unless you come to some really simple villains of the novel, which I know we're going to get into. But most of the characters, I think I want to show those sides.
Just to, because you've now spoken about these characters and the villains, I think that you wrote a lot of the characters in the gray space of morality, right? You challenge the reader a little bit, and particularly the women in this book, right? Yes, we're talking about Riza Bibi, but initially I thought Janara was going to be this like villain, and she is a villain because what she does is like absolutely horrific and it's unimaginable, and what she does to Mina is horrible. But you also recognize the fact that the position Akbar places her in is unfair, right? It's to have your world in a to have imagined your world in a very particular way, and to have somebody come in and want to redefine the terms of engagement in ways that suit them also creates a very particular environment. Abba didn't even try to hide the favoritism. And there's a thing about always being treated as second best, even when you try very hard to be this thing that this person wants you to be, that you're obviously not. And a lot of the characters in this book, especially the women, inhabit those gray areas, right? So they're not like you think about Sana's twin sister who was deprived of the ability to live in this life, right? So she gets to see Sana go through all of these motions and live a very particular life, and she hasn't been able to experience that. So is she a menace? Yes. But she's also had this tragic thing happen to her. And that is an interesting space to be in. Like these women who are villainous, but who you can also empathize with, right? And I think it's interesting that you made the comment around people being imperfect, right? Because you've written these imperfect women who are not simple villains.
Also, I want to push back on, are they villains? Because I feel that
Janara is a villain. Janara is a villain. Janara is a villain. Janara, please let the record state. Janara is a villain. What she does to Mina is unthinkable. She's a villain. She is a villain. Please, can the record state that? Thank you.
I'm not saying what she did is not villainous. I'm not saying what she did is not grotesque. I'm just saying, calling them villains, do we deny them their full humanity? Because what you effectively have been saying in your discussion about these complicated and imperfect characters is that, yes, they're imperfect and therefore they do imperfect things, right? And so is it fair for us to call them villains, right? And I want to know, do you call them villains, right? Are they the villain in the novel because of the villainous things that they do?
Not you. History in real time. That's so cool. In real time. Wow.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Look, I will call Iqbal Babu a villain because I never gave him room in the novel to grow or to see any side of him except his bad side, because he's such a small character in the novel. And so he plays purpose, as in terms of my characters laying them out in front of me, he plays purpose of the villain because he has not been developed enough. And so I can call him a villain. I like this thing of saying Jahanara Begum does some villainous things. but
it's like,
you know, I think of her, Jahanara Begum, as like a Lady Macbeth character who does the murder and then she goes mad trying to clean the blood off her hands. So I see her like that. She is a villain in her own way, just to make you both happy, but she also does villainous things.
I just want to say, I don't want to fight the cheeky natives. She's a villain and does villainous things. I feel like Sana's sister is also a villain, right? I feel if she could, she would. She did. She said to Sana, if you love me, you will kill yourself so you can be with me. Yeah. Do you love me?
Lonely. I mean, she's lonely. She's like in this weird place where she's of spirit, but she's not fully in the spirit world. And so she has to be in the physical world and see Sana just like flourishing. And there's a thing to be said about what it looks like to have somebody live out your dreams that you in some ways feel are like unattainable to you, right? And I think people don't want to have the conversation around envy, right? Envy and jealousy as a thing. It feels like even as a society, we've started to intellectualize envy. So even when you know that you feel envious or you're jealous, once you intellectualize that, it's almost be like, oh, there's like an intellectual critique, whereas it's just a real feeling. Sana's sister is envious. She's jealous that Sana is living and she's not. and that jealousy manifests in her behaving in particular ways. And if you can understand Jana, then you can definitely understand why Sana's sister is feeling the way that she feels. Thanks.
But then Alma, is she a villain or a villain? Does she have villainous ways?
No, she's a villain, guys, but she's a villain. She's a villain, right? She's a villain, but there are many villains in this book. And
and there are degrees of villains, right? Jana,
no grading. There's no grading. Someone leaves someone's child without a mother and effectively without a father because of her behavior, okay? And the one is like a confused spirit who just needs to be guided to the other side. I don't know how those two people in your eyes talking on are the same kind of villain. Make it make sense. Who sets a line on who in this book? Thank you.
Oh my God, I'm actually tearing.
That these two things are the same. I'm judging. I want Nathan to know that I'm judging the Tokonola in this book. Wow.
I'm just saying, I agree with you. If we think about villains, like there is one villain over the other, but I'm also saying.
Yeah, but if the spirit sister got away, she would have made Sana kill herself, and then somebody would have lost their daughter. So then it's,
So everybody's the same. Everybody's the same. I want to just about. We spoke earlier about the idea of the house as a character, but I think what you also do in the novel is you essentially conceptualize this idea of home. Is it a place? Is it a feeling? Is it a country? Is it a person? And we know Sana says in the novel you write, she knows home. She knows it is not an easy place to find, right? And I wanted to speak a little bit about that, the idea of conceptualization of home and what you wanted to bring forth in the novel, thinking about the ways in which, particularly saying that she knows it's not an easy place to find. What are the conceptualizations of home, particularly thinking also about like the past, right, of a particular migration, right, and how that separates you from your home country in some ways. So I wanted to speak a little bit about notions and concepts of home.
I think when I was writing about home, I think maybe now I'm a bit older, but like when I was younger, I thought home was, a very obvious understanding of what home was, like a place where you can retreat to, and like maybe a physical home. And now I really think like home is where you feel like you can be who you are. I'm really starting to believe that. And when Sana says, Sana's father says home is a memory, it's a place where you feel safe, I think. And everyone's understanding of home is different. But I think I was really thinking about as you get older, and home changes also all the time, like your idea of what home is and even like for me right now, the thing I most highly prioritize is like being in a place where I can feel, or being with people, or being somewhere where I can feel like who I am. I can be true to who I am. Whereas maybe I think 5 years ago, home was something like where my parents are. And it's just fascinating for me, this place where you feel safest and where you feel comforted, even if it might be a memory. And you said did you say in terms of migration, Te Tohonolo?
Yeah, I was thinking just in terms of thinking of home as a place, right? But also just the idea of like movement, right? It feels like oftentimes we are in like a transient space, right? So home in the physical sense is not there, but it could be home of a memory of like, when we were younger.
Yeah. That's how I was thinking of home always, like not a physical thing, but like a state of being. What is home to you? Where do you feel safest? Where do you feel happiest? And often for me, a state of being. And then to be able to recognize home is also so important. What is it? Because sometimes you don't even recognize it. You don't even know what it is. And so I think And also Sana is just also always looking for a place to fit because she doesn't know where she fits. And so home for her is that peace, is the place where she can fit, whatever that means. Yeah.
Now, I'm just curious about this love story between Akbar and Mina is very interesting. I know we spoke about love stories earlier, but I do think that it would be remiss for us not to speak a little bit about this relationship, right? It starts off in a very unlikely way, and it blossoms into a great love story, or the great love story of the book. But I'm just curious about this particular relationship. The relationship between him and his first wife, we can see what would happen in terms of class positioning, in terms of what society expectations are of him. But he chooses Mina. Mina doesn't choose him. She chooses him later. But he chooses Mina, and it's very interesting that he makes the kind of romantic decisions that he does. And the fact that they love each other in the way that they do is interesting, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about that relationship because the book is called The Lost Love of Akbar Manzil, and to not talk about that lost love would be remiss.
The lost love of Akbar Manzil can mean the jinn's love, by the way. But
fair enough. It could mean the jinn's love, but the jinn still has some parts of Mina, right? In ways that Akbar does not. Akbar loses Mina, and then subsequently we know what happens to him in the book. And so that's what I'm curious about, because I feel that the jinn has been able to hold on to some parts of their love for Mina.
I mean, look, I think I was also making commentary on caste systems as well. And things that disturbed me growing up. People telling me when I was growing up, oh, get a very fair husband. And an aunt told me something like, get a husband and he stands next to a white wall. You won't know where he is or the wall is. And like these things, I was really afraid when this aunt told me this. But also, I'm just making social commentary on caste systems and class systems, and that when it comes to love, it didn't matter. This was something completely that his mother and his wife could not understand. And there are many people in my community I know who cannot understand. Oh, how would a man of that power love someone in her position with her skin color? And so I was also I think it was important to me to make that kind of commentary that that they could be in love and they could have a good a love story and be in love because of the things that I was told growing up, especially in like my Indian community. And so I think that was it. And yeah, that was part of it. That was part of it. But I also just wanted to tell a really good love story and how sometimes love happens in the most unlikely ways that you don't expect, which is the very wonderful thing about love that I need to remind myself also. Like, love can be unexpected, and that's one of the wonderful things about love also. And yeah, so I think that's where the Mina love story came from.
I love the way that you just like lighting up, speaking about love. It's actually a good question to be like, oh, love can happen in the most unusual ways.
Yeah, but it can, yeah.
What do you hope your book does now that it's out in the world and it's out of your hands and it's left to the reader's interpretation? But what do you hope readers who pick up your book get out of your book?
No one has asked me that question. Oh my God. That's amazing. Doctor says this line about the paper flowers, and he says, you can have everything one day, and the next day you can have nothing. And I think I just want the book to be a reminder that life is so unexpected and lovely. Life is lovely if you can learn to live beyond the grief. I think that's what I'm aiming for. It will always be hard at points, but I hope I don't know if it does it, but that's what I would hope it to do. like to look beyond, to try. That's what life is about for me, to try. And all these characters are trying. Yeah. I think that's what I would want.
To live beyond the grief. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful conversation. I think the great thing about books is the kind of conversation that they bring up. And even when they are dissenting views, I think that the most interesting thing is just the ways in which we are given a lens into the different interior lives, but also into different experiences. And so thank you so much for this conversation, but also thank you so much from the Cheeky Natives for this conversation. And this is an encouragement to everybody to please go and get the book. You can message the Cheeky Natives if you want a copy of the book, and we will have a copy that we can have sold to you. So definitely reach out to the Cheeky Natives. Don't ask the author for PDFs or just be weird, because then you will be in her next book. Don't do it. Once again, thank you so much, everybody, and we really do look forward to seeing more of your work, Shubnum.
Thank you so much for the questions. They were so interesting and they made me think hard. And I do think it helps that we're doing this at 8, 9 o'clock at night, because we're all tired. So we don't have our inhibitions. And then we just go with the conversation because we're so tired. You're like almost drunk and you just have the best conversation because you're sleepy and you're tired after a long day. And sometimes those are the best conversations. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for me think deeply about my work. So I appreciate that.
All right, Cheeky Natives, you've heard it here. We make authors think deeply about their work. Until our next episode, this is us signing out.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Cheeky Natives. Don't forget to subscribe, review, and rate the podcast on all your streaming platforms.